We have a small group this week, but I'm happy to introduce Ritwik Banerji, who is a PhD student at UC Berkeley. His work encompasses a number of fields. He does interactive media stuff, computer music stuff, ethnomusicology stuff. And today we're going to be doing an exploration of kind of getting inside the mind of an improviser. Chris Chafe, beloved faculty, is going to be interacting with some software that is prepared by Ritwik, and then we're all going to have a chance to get inside Chris's head.
Yeah, so thanks. What's your name?
Mark.
Mark?
Yes.
Shuching and?
Yuval.
Yuval. Okay, great. So, thanks for stopping by. And so, yeah, like Jack said, this is a system that I designed called Maxine. And Maxine is supposed to be like a virtual improviser. So it's supposed to, the idea is that it should be able to be, you're able to play with it and enjoy playing with it the way that you would with another free improviser that you like. And so what I've done in my fieldwork is test this system with lots of improvisers, mostly in Berlin and Chicago and San Francisco, obviously. And asked them to compare it to a human player and just describe the differences or maybe even similarities with human players. Yeah, and so there are various purposes I have for that, which I'll sort of discuss at the end more formally with slides and all that. But for now, what we're going to do, so yeah, it's called live fieldwork because as it sounds, it is basically what I do in my fieldwork live or in front of other people. So normally it's just me and another improviser in a studio someplace. And they come by and then they play with the system and we talk about it. And so the methodology that I use is either to let, either Chris and Maxine will reach a natural stopping point in the piece, or they will, or I also invite Chris to, and I also, as I invite improvisers to do as well, to stop in the middle if he finds that something is terribly wrong and that he wants to tell me about that. Or just something that he wants to comment on. Yeah, so what we'll do is that Chris will play a piece with Maxine. Let's do the guitar thing, maybe?
Yeah, sounds good.
And then, so this is Maxine sort of doing a Derek Bailey impression, so it's like a guitar improviser, again, electric guitarist improviser. Yeah, so first I'll ask Chris some questions, and then I'll leave it open to our intimate audience to also ask Chris questions, and if I may, you could direct your questions to Chris. I know some of you are going to have questions for me about how the system works, but that's less relevant in my opinion. Anyway, so are you? Yeah. Let me just double check that I am ready. This is very important. Okay, let's see. Sorry for the delay. All right. Sorry, just a second. Go ahead. That's where you would have wanted to
Yeah,
stop.
probably. Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah.
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 So you would have wanted to have, you would have felt that another player would have had a clear sense of style.
Might have heard that was a cadence almost.
Right.
You know,
Right.
As much as you can call it cadence, right?
Yeah. Right. No. Well. Yeah. Yeah. And so then some questions about that. So then there were previous common pauses, right? So I guess they were too soon into the piece for you to feel like they were.
Didn't, it was almost more like a kind of flow. The statements. There was a lot of really good stuff back and forth, and I thought there was a completion, right? And you can have grand pauses that aren't complete. You keep going. But
Yeah,
in this case,
that's
it's like that's one I would have. If I were an editor, I'd probably play with it right there.
Right.
On the other hand, keep going too. You can have
Right.
next movement.
Right. Yeah.
But I figured, but we played for about 12 minutes, so that was about right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So yeah, then other questions, I guess, just about like how, as I said, how does it compare to a human player? Like, what does it feel?
Yeah, there's so much invention going on. I'm out of practice, and this was rocket ship stuff to be able to keep up. But I almost, I had a sense of a kind of back and forth going on. So there was a lot of places that I kind of followed, other places where I almost thought I was being followed, and then a lot of places where it just felt like a trajectory, kind of like two killer whales in formation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a great feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So were you able to feel that it was interacting with you, or was this, how important was that,
I felt it was. I mean, I find it very important, I could do the experiment of, playing against something that was recorded in a studio, playback, I'm playing against it. Don't know if you could record that in the studio. That's the thing. If you take me out, and I'd love to know the punchline on this. Like, was it, there's a mic over here.
Well, it was listening to you.
Yeah,
not doing any of that right now.
So the inventions, it depended on myself for the inventions that it was doing, as well as the reverse.
Right. Yeah.
So,
did you feel like it was able to give you ideas?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Could you?
There was a bunch of stuff. A lot of it was textural. A lot of it was actually harmonic. Some good stuff there. This kind of crunchy Derek Bailey, amped up thing was great. And there's this place where the dynamics have to just shoot to the top, and it did, and it held it. But it didn't hold it forever.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of important for the, at least for the flow that I think we have there. Yeah, and you know, often in, you know, in a duo or small group, there are like just crazy good moments that you want to latch onto. You know, like those are the kind of crystals or the ore that you want to. If you made a recording, you'd go back and say, "Wow, look at what we got there." You know, and there were some things, yeah, like the ending,
Right.
that took a little bit of user intervention.
Right, yeah, the ending that took a little bit of
Yeah.
user intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so, yeah. Do any of you have any questions for Chris?
Yeah, fire away, like, you know, what's wrong with my bow technique?
Or just things that I forgot to ask, you know, that I'm not, you know, yeah.
I'm really curious, this being a human versus computer interaction. If you had a sense that your sound was prioritized or more important or less important as compared to if you were doing this with a human?
I've had humans who listen a lot less. Yeah, some pretty well known. And it's frustrating, actually.
Yeah.
It's much more fun to be in a dialogue, right? You know, so, yeah, honestly. So that was fun, yeah.
I think you mentioned, like, when you mentioned things like, you know, you felt like you had to go this way, like the dynamics really had to shoot to the top. I'm wondering, like, that sense of inevitability, that you musical inevitability that you feel, like, how much of that do you think is different with your whatever you know or don't know about the system you're playing with, and
Right.
I wonder how that tempers your sense of inevitability.
That's totally cool. So we didn't really rehearse, we just sound checked.
Mm-hmm.
And I could feel, I mean, you know, maybe erroneously, but not erroneously, because I could feel it. Like, I could feel that this thing wanted to go push, you know, and so, yeah, let it go all the way, you know, and
you almost heard like some, for all intents and purposes, like some intentionality or sense of intent. That doesn't have to be intentionality, but like.
but yeah, direction. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. It was definitely, and I was really happy that it would pull back and do some you know, smaller dynamics and go in there. And you know, it could be a fantastic piece at the lower dynamic level. That would be a very fun version of this if it never did kind of, you know, go pedal to the metal and scream. I don't think I could do it the other way. You know, I'm not sure that this instrument would be cut out for like full-on triple forte, you know, continuous. So that might be a different thing.
So did you feel like it, if anyone, does anyone, yes, that's right, I'm sorry.
Did you kind of like, so there's no visual aspect which you would have with another human performer. Did you kind of miss that? Was it restricting? Was it freeing? Was it like more difficult? Because like if you had another, you'd know when to end.
Yeah, well, I had this third participant for the ending where that was yeah, that's key. But I you know, hear, but you know, maybe it's just me. I tend to close my eyes anyway, so.
Also, you do a lot of network music.
Yeah, and the network music, where you can't use the visuals, you know, because they're so delayed. But you know, whether I missed that, like, what would this look like? Yeah. Design the right avatar for that. You know.
Yeah, but also like it's not watching you. I mean, it's listening to you, but it's
But it's not watching me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It's a good point. Yeah. Right. Unless we get Mari Kimura's bow in there, and it is watching that.
Right.
Yeah.
So it moved in dynamic a lot. Did you feel that the change in dynamic was something that reflected a lack of commitment to certain musical ideas, or did you want it to commit more to certain things and stay in a certain space?
Good. So that kind of unfolding that was going on, you know, in terms of texture,
Right.
had a certain pacing to it, which very, very much reminded me of players I've worked with. You know, like you know, it's kind of like a, for better or worse, I call it kind of like fast thinking music that wants to keep unfolding rather than get stuck. And you know, very, there is a little bit of reminiscence there from some, I do, for example, I do a lot of playing with Roberto Morales, and he'd be right in there. You know, this is very much in his
moving around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a it's almost imagine a dancer that's doing this, right? You know, and he's in the same place often when we're playing together. So yeah, that was a really kind of neat thing. So I don't think this explored kind of oral playing outside of my improvisation too much. You know, it was kind of close actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Why don't we try another piece?
Do you want to do a Bob, or are you going to do another Maxine?
Let's do Maxine playing another instrument. Bob's another system, but I'm just not going to mess with that today. So do you want to do maybe the metal percussion or the? Yeah,
do you want to? If we're going to switch it up, do you want me to switch instruments, or is that we'd have to mic it, or is it better?
Why don't we just stick with the cello?
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry to make you pull out this.
No, this is there in case Bob needs it.
So do you prefer the metal percussion or the analog synthesizer, or what do you feel?
Let's do the analog. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, although there's a bit of similarity to Derek, but maybe it has some other invention.
Right, and it's not supposed to be necessarily Derek Bailey.
No, it's
just what a guitarist who prepares and does, and does extended techniques with the guitar might do.
Yeah.
So, ready?
Yep. Now, how did it know?
All right, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so similar questions, you know, how did it feel? I guess what I'm more curious about now is, what I'm always curious about is, does it feel like an equal partnership, and if so?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So tell me more about why
equal?
where's that
Yeah,
feeling
yeah,
coming
yeah.
from?
Well, it starts with the sound, like having the two amps.
Yeah.
That's kind of equal partners, right?
Right.
And it's a good thing we didn't set one of us up there. I can see
Yeah.
why-
Thanks for
why
being
go
open to that.
but
Yeah.
We're both getting paid the same amount.
That's right.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
And I would say the truth of it is almost difficult to put into words, right? It really has to do with this, just communication that's going on.
Right.
And a lot of it is, it's not, there's there's definitely more than two kinds, but there's a kind of turn-taking thing that can happen, and there's synchrony that can happen. And there's a lot of synchrony in this one as well. So
Interesting.
that kind of dialogue texture stuff was shifting around a lot. That's really interesting when that happens. Camberley, super fun. This was a really interesting place for a cello, I think. At least for my taste.
Right, right.
Really good that way.
Yeah, how did you feel about how it was relating to Tamara?
Great. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of, one of my more preferred duos is sax players, and cello and saxophone, and I don't know what it is. I mean, it's been that way forever for me, and it just often you can meld really well, and you can distinguish, and you can also build things that aren't one or the other, but they're gestalts, right? I guess. Campbell gestalts. Anyway, this was capable of all of that.
So was there any time when you would have wanted it to? I mean, I guess what I'm always interested in is people's complaints, to be frank, about it. Like, what kinds of things did it do that you would have wanted it to do differently in relating to you?
Seriously, the ending thing.
The ending thing.
Yeah.
So you would have wanted to have some better sense of the ending thing.
Yeah, that's
Right,
tough.
yeah,
That's tough.
yeah. That is the dissertation I did not write. Is about
endings.
about how endings happen.
Beethoven.
Sorry?
Said Beethoven. Endings are a tricky thing.
Right. Yeah.
Because again, I thought we kind of got actually to a good spot, and if I were with someone watching, and I went over to,
They would know you want to go
where I
further.
started from. Yeah, that was
Were
like.
you planning to
I was
go
almost
further?
going to make another one of those skronks down there.
Yeah,
one of
right.
these,
Yeah.
but it didn't need to because it stopped at the right point.
Right.
And that
But
became more
that's-
of a kind of visual thing.
Yeah.
And then it played another note until you
Snapped it.
took away its
Yeah.
electrons.
Right. Yeah. So you're finding it to be reminiscent of playing with a human player. Is there anything strange about that? Is there any? No.
Well, cello in general in improvisation is has always been a kind of specialized thing in a way. It's not so common.
Right.
So I find myself in a lot of territory where there is no written this is the way it ought to go.
There is.
thing.
Right.
So I'm really open to stuff like this, and this is a good one. I mean, it complements on the algorithms.
It's the same algorithm as
Yeah.
that was there 8 years, almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But thank you. Any questions from
Yeah.
you all? Yes, please. Yes.
I think it's a question going back to the phenomenology part of this, which is really I guess it has to do with how you think or embody the source of the sound. How do you think about that? Trace the bracketing happening. Are you bracketing it to, is it just the sound? Or are you thinking about something that makes the sound? Or is it some other association? Or does it go in and out? Do you see what I mean? What's the level of, where's the bracket? How wide is the bracket?
Yeah, I'm not imposing some kind of physical thing on it, I just,
Is it purely
it's
just
pure,
the
it's sound, it's all the material of the sound with some behavior, but I don't try to see it as a person turning knobs in this case.
Right, but if you hear it as more you think this is more percussive versus more, something that is percussive versus something that is more of generates more of a continuous tone, for example. Do you think in that level? I'm really trying to get at. By the way, I just want to say I've been wanting to ask you these questions for 10 years. I've been watching you perform for 10 years, and
sorry about
what's going through your mind. So, this is actually exactly.
We're done. We're done. That's all this is about, really. So, yeah.
Right. So thank you for giving this opportunity to this brain, and to actually feel like we're.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's interesting because, there's also introspection about that goes on in
Yeah.
improvisers' minds. It's what are my habits? and can I get away from them and do things that I don't do, you know? And so a lot of that happens with well, different combinations, but like a lot of times in your, you know, duo work, you'll have opportunities to go places you wouldn't go on your own, and you know, this one's fun that way. When it's solo work and I'm being really self-conscious, then I'm trying to kind of almost materialize what are my habits and you know,
But
add to it.
are you go along?
Yeah.
Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
The question I had about that is Professor Wang's point is that do you talk to other improvisers about the kinds of faux pas and miscommunications that might happen with regard to an ending, or not, or under what conditions would you not?
I never do.
Never would.
Never,
and presumably you two
yeah.
have played together quite a lot.
Some.
Never say a word. Just play music.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we never talk about it.
And
And we never, sometimes you never really need to, but at the same time, I would be lying if I never wondered what's going through Chris's mind.
Oh well.
right.
Likewise.
Right. You feel free to ask me anything. I'll try my best to.
Right. Yeah. So you don't not even in like a class or something.
Oh no. I'm just talking on my part. It's
Yes.
just talking about improv. You know, when I'm playing with other.
You don't. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Is it? And what would be the reasons, do you think, here for this kind of thing?
Just, I guess the productivity goes up when you keep playing.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Life is short. You know, something like that.
Yes. And you know, as I said before, it's like doesn't always work out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And this, you know, whatever's Wizard of Oz here
Yeah.
gets to stay.
No, it's no Wizard of Oz. I'm not doing any Wizard of Oz.
I'd love to know more
Yeah.
about what's in there.
Right. Yeah. It's all on the paper. So are you all gonna stick around for a little while, or should we do another piece, or should we?
I've got I'll time out in a half hour, so.
Okay.
Whatever works.
Then I will relieve you of your duties. Thank you so much, Chris.
Well, thank you.
So then I just wanted to say some of the other feedback that people have had. Thank you all for your questions. It's actually, I'm quite pleased with how this all has gone. So yeah, just to wrap up, the issue you raised is exactly the issue that it motivates the whole thing, is that when you have someone play with, is it theoretically happening? So yeah, the issue that Professor Wang raised is exactly the issue that motivates this whole matter, which is about just sort of prying apart the whole thing, because you sort of get settled into just not talking about things. And so the main question for all of this, you know, when we phrase it more formally, is what is exactly, do free improvisers have specific expectations? And you can see that I'm already expressing some skepticism about this main research question. Do they really have expectations? Do they have expectations? Why do I have this skepticism? Because there are all kinds of issues that arise in relationship to the liberal commitments of free improvisation. So you're supposed to have no stylistic constraints. It's supposed to be a non-idiomatic thing. So discourse about improviser, as well as my field work as a saxophonist. I should mention I'm also a saxophonist. And so people really just end every session with this kind of thing. Maybe this isn't how they feel about it, but that's what is more appropriate to say. I suppose I could have analyzed the poetics of, you know, someone saying, oh, nice sounds versus whatever, but generally you get mostly positivity. And being in the Bay Area makes this, of course, worse. But so on a practical level, there's a, you know, you could think of it one way as in a composerly way, in a computer music way of thinking how to identify flaws and improve the system, and you have been useless in this particular goal because you have found Maxine to be more like a human player. So when I started doing this, like about 8 years ago, I found that this kind of egalitarian veneer was broken because you don't feel any hesitation to be upfront with people with me about how this thing compares to human beings. So there have been other people who have been a bit more direct about it. And then exactly to what Ron was pointing out, this is what one bass player named Torsten, or called Torsten, has said. He was in the middle of this long tirade about how Maxine is confusing him and sort of playing him into the silence and things like that. And then in the middle of this litany, he said, I just wish I could tell people things like this. And this is someone who's played with a lot of really famous improvisers in the world circuit of improvisers. And so really this is what I'm looking for, is to understand what are these things that people wish they could tell each other, but do not. And it's surprising to hear that it happens even in the context of an institution. You know, we're in an educational institution. It's surprising to hear that this kind of thing isn't made explicit. But that happens for whatever reason that it does. That's another matter. Anyway, so the whole project is really to study the way that egalitarian discourse informs improvisers. So there's one side of it, which is just what we were talking about a second ago, which is that this is an expression of that. You don't tell people things because they're supposed to be your equal. And so that's one level of it, but then the other side of it is also in the actual playing moment itself, what actually allows people to have this phenomenology of egalitarianism. What I mean is that what gives them the phenomena, the experience of equal partnership. So basically my data has shown two types of preferences. So one is more about cooperation, sympathy, support. These are some of the ways, discursively that it's framed. Metaphorically, in sort of a cognitive metaphor, there might be something like proximity or distance, but I haven't really looked at things for those spatial metaphors specifically. And then, of course, there's another side of it, which is some players prefer very defiant attitudes, autonomy. This all makes sense. So in terms of just sharing a little bit about, this should just play the sound right away, right? Don't you relax. So one example of a player who preferred cooperation. It's not that the players necessarily always prefer cooperation, but this was just a moment that provoked him to frame the matter in this way that Maxine was failing to give him some sense of cooperation. This is just some information about his background. I'm not going to go into that right now, but there's a moment where he was playing a long piece with Maxine, and then Maxine gets stuck in sort of a undulating feedback thing, and he's trying to get out of it, and so this is what it sort of sounds. And I designed the system to sort of have this defiant attitude at times because it's productive in the performance, but it was the wrong moment. And so this is what the moment was. So you can So he tried various things. He was trying to fight his way out of it. He would sometimes, at some point, he played just long tones, and then at the end, he commented on it. And this is what he had to say.
There was this moment when there was this thing quite long, like for quite a while.
Yes, that was quite intense.
It was very intense.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also annoying.
And I can turn it off if you want.
I mean, whatever. But this is something like, as a person you would know, alright, it's good.
Don't need to keep it there.
Yeah. Or change it or do something with it.
Yeah.
Stuff like this,
Yeah, so he is being forthright with me, right? And then there is also the fact that in certain Northern European, Germanic cultures, this forthrightness is a cultural trait, and he's sort of providing an example of this in his own attitude here. But you also see the same sort of hesitation there's a hedge, right? If we take a more conversation analytic perspective of this, I mean whatever this is something, he's hedging it. He's not really willing, once the explicit complaint comes out, he's not really willing to commit to it. So anyway, for these moments where cooperation is preferred, obviously some sort of defiant behavior where you're not going the same direction as the other player is regarded as being offensive to an egalitarian experience. So failure to display attentiveness, to put it more formally, is regarded as injurious. And then the preference for defiance is the exact opposite. Displays of attentiveness are regarded as being injurious to rather than being beneficial to the experience of egalitarian partnership. So this sort of cooperative ethic is regarded as being something that is creating a leader or follower dynamic, or perhaps making one player feel self-conscious, or making them feel that the other player is sort of, just following them around. So for one player who was a cellist, let's call him Francis. He's lived and worked in Amsterdam for years, but now he's based in Berlin. He's active in free improvisation and children's theater. So I asked him to do a quick sound check. He actually played. He sort of closed his eyes and he played with Maxine for an hour. At one point I thought he had fallen asleep because he was sort of in his chair. And then after the end of this reverie, this is what he had to say.
I don't know, so what did you think? What was it like playing with it? You said you liked it.
Yeah, I thought it was, I mean, a lot of people I could see that they don't like it, but I'm not a person that reacts that much.
What do you mean?
As an improviser, I don't react to what someone else is doing.
You try to keep us the stream of your own.
I found it interesting in that way that it's a machine, and so it gives me a lot of distance.
It felt like you had some space from it. Huh.
Yeah, so with Francis, sorry.
So what did you think?
So with Francis, this divergent playing was regarded as something unproductive, but there's some ambiguities that arise in this more defiant attitude. So, I'm sorry, Brian was the informant that I cut from this talk, so Francis. So yeah, it's hard to tell whether is defiance agreeing to disagree, or is it actually that the other player is so it can be regarded as a type of cooperation, that's all I'm trying to say. And then the other side of it is that if another player is playing defiantly, you don't, because there's no display of attentiveness, you don't know if they're listening, so having a preference for this type of playing creates this kind of situation where you're not really able to tell. As I said before, however, it's not the case that every player, each player just has a preference for cooperation or preference for defiance. All of them at some point have expressed a preference for both, but they've never really been sure, they've never really been able to articulate in the same way that Chris had some difficulty being, the words were not coming of how to describe what this experience is and what is desirable about it. So then this is a classic example of the Aristotelian concept of phronesis, or a type of practical wisdom. So this is basically the idea that you have a virtue such as honesty, and that it is valuable to be honest, and then at some point it is not valuable to be honest. And for improvisation seems to be a situation where it is valuable to not always be honest, from what the two of you have sort of pointed out. And there are various reasons why this is the case, but when I'm talking about phronesis, I'm saying that we want to have an equal partnership, so do we take a cooperative or defiant attitude in that. And so one example of this ambiguity, I'm sorry, let me skip ahead here just a bit. So we already heard from Francis. So Udo is an improviser based in Berlin. He's 50 years old. He's conservatory trained, but in piano, also plays jazz. So in the first take with Maxine, we had 2 mics just on Udo's trumpet. In the second take, we did the same sort of setup that we did with Chris, where we had a split setup. And in the third take, we had both takes just on Maxine's amplifier. And as it turned out, he preferred the third take the most. He said that as a younger player, he was very reactive. He liked to have this very reactive style, but he describes that kind of playing as just one of many different options. And he tends to prefer some more defiant playing in the sense that there's a lack of display of attentiveness, but he still wants some moment of reactivity. So when I asked him to explain when should this reactivity emerge, this is what he had to say.
No, I mean this has been always the question is when it should switch from being very closely listening to what you're doing to almost ignoring you and just listening to itself. And the question of when to switch, do you have any idea of when that is? What is it that makes you do that switch?
It has to do, I mean, the problem is, it has to do with the whole history of music and
okay.
It's a very complex thing.
Right.
History of improvisation.
So when asking, I'm looking, this classic failure of an ethnographer of asking someone for an explanation of sort of what is a holy grail concept in this culture, and I get this response that is, I'm sure he's being sincere and earnest about this, but it's not very helpful for an ethnography and certainly for designing a system. If I were looking for a way for it to toggle between these two things, I guess the other thing I was also going to say, I'll wrap up quickly. Please take me to the end. Yes, it's just that with the defiant attitude, the thing that's very confusing about that with Francis was that we all spend, I think, all of us, I'm assuming in this room, spend a lot of time designing systems that are very good at being sensitive, and we would assume that greater sensitivity would be what we're expected to do as designers. And this was an interesting moment where he points out that that's actually something that might be a waste of energy in some way. So rather than give you more analysis of that, I'm going to leave it open, depending on how long people have to hang around. And so thank you so much. So questions are very much appreciated.
I just have a comment really quickly.
Yes.
That last idea is something that came up in last week's colloquium too, where like this idea that it was in the context of like creating an instrument for yourself rather than improvising with someone else. But it was this idea that you don't want what you're creating or the technology that you're using always to like be this exact replicate sort of thing, that like unsteadiness in the system can give you a lot more to work with creatively and expressively. So.
Right. Is it about designing an instrument? Or?
Yeah. The talk was specifically around using machine learning in an interactive way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, she's all about machine learning. Yeah.
So I just thought that was an interesting parallel with what you were saying, that
she was designing instruments by example, using machine learning.
Yeah.
You would give it example, like if I do this gesture from here, it sounds thusly. If I do this different gesture, it sounds this other way. And then, but if as you go now smoothly from now doing this gesture to doing this other gesture, there's some potentially sensible interpolation between these two examples that is at once, I think, what you would kind of expect, but also there's something surprising about it. And you're kind of after both the surprise of both, you're actually after both elements, in that you gave a data point here of how it's supposed to sound if I did A, and how it's supposed to sound if I did B, but if you go halfway, you didn't give an example there, and the system kind of try to learn and try to come up with something of how it would sound in the middle. And I think she mentioned that tension is interesting because it should be sensible, but also it's a sound that you maybe didn't expect to hear. But you can work with that as long as the system perhaps affords you, some consistency and some exploratoriness that you can do this. And you can give another example if you want, but I just want to, for the echo thing, it's an interesting comment, good comment. I think we're ever seem to be after this tension of like excitation and, well, like, I think you put it beautifully. It's like, you know, it's accordance, alignment to defiance, right? You kind of, maybe I think one of the, I think that's great questions. When use, where is the boundary? When is the boundary, to put it, okay, or simply, you know, it's just anyone wants to.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really, so one of the things, so I designed the system before I got to Berkeley. And I had thought that I might develop it further as I was at Berkeley. And then in talking to another composer there, I'm not a composer, right? I'm an ethnomusicologist, whatever that distinction means at this point. And then but he had said that he had made a system and that he felt that in rehearsals with the human former and the system that it wasn't necessarily, there was always a point where it suggested further programming or either just further rehearsal. And then this gave me an idea that actually this is, rather than, so I just sort of took the easy route and didn't necessarily improve Maxine or integrate any sort of machine learning component to it. And then the result of that is that actually you have 100 musicians who have all commented on virtually the same system, which I think is quite helpful. Yeah, and down the line, the objective is to make some sort of corpus where people can sort of hear a clip and read a transcript. And I don't know. I mean, I think it would be useful if you're trying to like teach kids or students about free improvisation of like what are the different kinds of feelings you might have about other players. Yeah.
Maybe to turn the tables around you to go inside your brain. Sorry, Chris, did you have a question?
No, go ahead, please. Yes.
So turn the tables on you a bit and go into your kind of your mind.
Sure.
And it's interesting you brought up Aristotle and Nicomachean Ethics, because I think it's in the front of that book. He says we ought not expect more precision than a discipline naturally affords.
Right.
And he was talking about.
It's very improvisatory.
It's really
yeah.
And he's a logician on one hand and an ethicist on another, and he's making this really profound statement that it really depends on what you're doing, the level of precision that you can really get out of it.
Right.
That makes it ususeful. And beyond that, you try to get more precision than a system actually affords. That's actually counterproductive. Right. So I think I think it's really interesting. So the question for you here is along that line, and along the last example where it's like, yes, it has to do with the history of music and the history of improvisation.
Very helpful, right?
That's very helpful. It's like super, like, it's saying this super tacit thing. And it's built up around like a lifetime of experience and preferences and exposure. But then you're clearly studying this as something that is more articulatable than simply it is we say it is, or like that. So I'm trying to figure out for you, where do you believe that boundary is between, where's the level of precision for the kind of for how people can articulate this, and to what degree is it useful for people to articulate this? And I'm super interested in this question.
Sure. I mean, so the first objective was just as a young improviser in Chicago, being interested in free improvisation and sort of coming from jazz and sort of asking older players, so what about where they're going in their directions. In other words, eliciting some sort of normative statement from them. And with free improvisers, I didn't include this kind of data, but there's just lots and lots of moments where they say, oh, there's no such thing as a good improviser. The same improviser can come to my living room in Chicago and with no pause of expletives tell me why they don't like Maxine, but will also tell me that there's no such thing as a good improviser. So the first objective was to simply get underneath that veneer and find out what they're saying. But then what you're getting to is that it is a real limit to how precise it can be, in terms of the issue of knowing when what decision should be made. I don't necessarily expect it to be definitive. In fact, it actually comes back to being one of the causes for this type of reticence. So if I may sort of jump back in here. So there are the various causes of this. When I'm saying reticence, I mean this. That was nice. Let's do it again. Why do we do this? One is described by Goffman as face work. We simply avoid the embarrassment. It is sort of a general hypothesis that one avoids embarrassing themselves or their peers. There's this commitment to freedom, liberal ideals. Then there's also a whole history of things, of popular cultural mockeries of free improvisation as only something for dilettantes and hacks, this kind of thing. But then there's also this side of it of just, I mean, basically this issue of the difficulty of actually talking about when you want these kinds of switches. They actually, I'm finding that, I mean, it seems convenient as another kind of explanation of why people are hesitant. So it sounds, it's kind of circular, but it's, in terms of analyzing this as social behavior, this seems to be how it functions, is that the fact that someone, the best they can come up with is the history of music as sort of, and his English isn't quite as bad as it sounds in that situation.
It's a pretty deep answer.
Yeah, it is a pretty deep answer, but in both languages,
it's honest.
in both German and English, this is about as much as he will have to say about it. And so, yeah, but in terms of the precision, so is your question like how much precision?
How well defined is, can it be, I mean, well definition gets you to be able to articulate, which gets you, for example, to build a design, a system that can exhibit some of these things you wanted to exhibit.
Right. So overall, what I'm doing could be also called requirements elicitation, right? In like a purely design type of way. Yeah.
Well, you have to kind of state the problem,
right,
and articulate the kind of what is it about in order to actually build it into the system. Unless I guess you're using maybe machine learning in an inspired way, which you can keep the tacit domain more or less tacit, because you just don't have to articulate it. You kind of have machine learn it. I don't know how much that's learned. Anyway, this is probably a whole different. I don't want to take up more of the time, but I think I do appreciate the whole exercise of doing this.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Other questions, comments? Yes.
Just, to what extent, I mean, this is spectacular that you've, gotten time from 100 different improvisers to talk about it. This never happens, like, yay for that. And the egalitarian, the two faces of it, but there's another too, and I wonder if it ever came up. Yeah. Which is this kind of like almost real-time learning. And, we've been talking about machine learning, but I'm talking about player-to-player learning. There's this like thing that happens, and it may be ephemeral, right? It may just be in the context of what's unfolding in a piece, but there's so much kind of, it has aspects of imparting ideas, new information, using that information on yourself, which we don't do in language so much. We do it when we're reflecting, but in the real-time context of improvisation, something comes in, you digest it, you go, wait a minute, oh, holy cow, yeah, here I am, going someplace I've never been before, and this is like happening all the time. In fact, it's almost boring if it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, many have complained about that kind of thing, that to complain that it's not a machine learning system or that it doesn't have memory, and that this is what's going to make it never be lifelike for them. Okay.
Yeah, but I think what comes out really nicely in the experiment is, with this, frozen 10-year-old algorithm, that's able to, throw some things at you.
So I have a paper coming out about this. So somebody asked me to write something about machine learning, having never used machine learning as a designer. So I did my best. And what that paper is about is, one of the things that it's about is that people have played with Maxine over time, which is the same system, and then they often make a comment, oh, it sounds better now, or it's really grown up, or it's like, oh, that third take, it was something was happening. And so there's a couple different layers to this. One is that there is what David Wesley used to talk about all the time, which is the exposure effect. So the effect of mere exposure. So exposure to one stimulus will lead to some sort of greater familiarity. Familiarity leads to pleasure, or greater positive evaluation. So that's one explanation for this sort of illusion. And then the other side of it is that your contributions to that static system are eliciting another side of its behavior. Yeah. You then experience that dynamic feedback loop as if it were some sort of adaptation. Exactly. So, and I think that this is the kind of player that you might be, because you are very generous, both in your commentary, but then also in the way that you play. It seems to me.
But that's what's kind of fun about this, learning now that it was only me. Yeah. In a sense, I mean, me, but presented with a machine which provokes in me all sorts of invention, right? Right. And it could, again, the sort of thought experiment, if that had been pre-recorded in some way, wouldn't have been the same. So it has to be dynamic. It's a dynamic machine. There's kind of a framework within having not done the machine learning part of it that's really, really interesting. And it's a little bit like George Louis Voyager, that's over years and years and years of this piece. Very much
same architecture.
More concerned with the egalitarian framework and not with like building smarts into it. Right. Yeah. Right.
I mean, the integration of machine learning is also a way that the designers are expressing some sort of egalitarian discourse. Machine learning is necessary because if this machine is going to have an equal partnership with the human player, it should be doing all the things that human players are doing. But these illusions, in the absence of machine learning, create an interesting. I mean, I would say that it is about it. It sort of sets up a benchmark that you have to be able to show that the system is improving at a rate that is superior to an exposure effect or a dynamic feedback. Does this make any sense? I mean, I don't know, but because I've had people have positive evaluations based on complete illusions, it does suggest that some sort of machine learning, you can't just assume. We've reached the absolute apex of the hype about machine learning.
Jump the shark on the
in fact, there was a business journal recently that said that machine learning has reached its peak of hype in 2016. Specifically.
Please continue. I got to pass.
Machine learning, and I think we've gotten to the point where even you need machine learning, you just need a perception of machine learning. Right. You can tell someone there's machine learning built in, and this is the third instance in about 6 days of talking about a real system that made people think that there's machine learning and think and really actually work meaningfully with it. And it's not because of machine learning, because there, as in these other cases, there actually was no machine learning whatsoever in these systems. But that people actually, in some ways, it's almost like, I would say, if I were to, maybe in Chris's case, if I were to pick on Chris, maybe he, in a way, played this less with this, but also at some level played it as an instrument. Right. That he created this other person, this other entity to play with.
Yeah, it's kind of
such
cool.
That it feels like another agentic, kind of a player. And you kind of played it to be that.
Did it feel like an instrument to you?
Yeah. Although, so I wasn't anthropomorphizing it. Right. And I wasn't. And I wasn't really doing the complete opposite and just saying, hey, this is a machine, and thinking that it's an algorithm. I really did have, maybe I was primed that, here's an improv algorithm, and improv, right?
So it didn't feel like playing a hyper instrument or something like that. Interesting.
No, that would be maybe more direct somehow,
Yeah,
feel I did more direct.
Because when George Lewis defines the problem of what this systems are about, it's a player, not an instrument paradigm. And of course that makes sense to a point, but with the cooperative ethic, it is actually sort of something that goes back to more instrument, like it's sort of a bunch of instruments playing each other or
there's
something.
a cross-fading
There
back
is,
into
yeah.
the instrument.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
Because Perry Coate would be someone that's saying, I don't want, he's like, well, he's the one that says smart instruments often aren't smart.
Right.
And he also say, I don't really want an instrument that learns me. I want an instrument that allows me to learn it. And that requires some kind of like dumbness on that piano interface, that's not going to change. That, that's going to be the same interface for the beginner as it is for like, the virtuoso, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the interface is exactly the same. And I think that because it doesn't change, you kind of gradually learn it. And I don't know, maybe when people feel better about Maxine, it's because they learned at some higher level. Maybe I'm just kind of throwing darts at it.
Well, I mean, this has been also what is a major fascination with it, is that will someone accept as human an agent that is exhibiting some kind of trace of human interaction in it? And you'd be surprised. This guy is like really shockingly generous about the whole thing. I mean, this is not been
Chris.
You saw what these people. I mean, I appreciate very much the improvisers who have worked with me, but they have not always been polite. And so it's interesting that. And of course, there are reasons. It's pent up, spending so much time around improvisers, other improvisers that they find frustrating that they can't disclose their sentiments to. But at what point do you start to accept something as being human when it exhibits these types of things, or why do you refuse to sort of engage with it that way? Yeah. Anyway.
Research. I think it's at Yale that studied how people feel about robots at playing games like cards, when the robot was basically just hard-coded to cheat.
Right.
And when a robot, and they don't know that it's been programmed to cheat, the robot doesn't know, it's not because it's decided to cheat, it was programmed just to exhibit that behavior.
Right.
But having that, people have to realize when the robot is trying to cheat, there's some switch that flips in the human mind's like, oh my god, there's something agentic about this robot. And its
ability to step outside of the system.
Step outside of the system, right?
Yeah.
And, I mean, I think somewhere on some continuum, I don't know if it's a continuum or some n-dimensional space of agency, it's it seems to be one way to think about instrument as a crossfades into Claire.
But that we know that something is human because it behaves like a rogue that's also what you're saying, right?
You can step out of the system, you can ever transcendentally
Whereas we want humans to be gentle and civil with us, we only know that they're human when they exhibit so ability to flaunt social norms and act like Marshall Lynch or something.
Right.
And
So defiance.
Yeah.
So defiance is kind of that, but you need to set up. It seems like you need to set up the defiance with ability to perform. Because if you just define all the time, that's it's never listening to me.
Yeah.
If you're like, oh, it can listen to me. It does play the card with me. It knows the rules. But suddenly it decides to defy the rules basically.
Yeah.
So and then.
Well, because most con games or something that are based on, you have to have the confidence for the game to be.
You really get the people into the rules and feel like you can't break the rules. And that's where. That's the con. I can keep going. I'll stop myself for now. This is super fascinating.
Well, I'm glad you all appreciate it. It's happy to finally come to CCRMA and CCRMA, however you say it, and share my work. So thank you so much.